Thank you, everybody, for joining in. I can assure you this did not happen to Salisbury Haley. So let's start off here taking a look at the city of Santa Barbara. And I have been here since my parents made me come here in 1961, and I've never left. I have fallen in love with this city, and thanks to so many wonderful people that have taught me about its history, I have in turn fallen in love with history. And one of the things I have just always been delighted with is our street names. And that it's set up so that you can walk the streets of Santa Barbara or drive or bicycle, whichever, and find out the history of Santa Barbara, the geology, the botany, the families, the political people, the first peoples that were here. All of that is readily available everywhere you walk. And I just don't think there's that many cities that are like that. So let's move from what we look like now and go back a few years. How was the city supposed to be planned? Well, the first zoning and ordinance plans were done in 1523. King Charles V, the King of Spain, the head of the Holy Roman Empire, laid down the first laws. And this was this was called the Laws of the Indies. And this was set up to tell you what to do to start a town in the New World. And it was sort of like the Idiot's Guide to Volkswagen Repair that most of us grew up with, or these other dummies books for today. This book told you everything that you needed to know. It told you, for example, well, first off, you've got to be by a good body of water. Secondly, don't put your slaughterhouse upstream or your laundry upstream or your bathing facilities upstream. Which way does the wind blow? And it also told you exactly how to lay out the town. So this is a typical type situation. You always had a central plaza. All the streets pointed north, south, east, west, according to the compass. At the end of the plaza, let's see if my cursor comes down there. There we have a church up there that went into the plaza. At the other end of the plaza would be the government buildings. The laws changed. They were updated and modified from time to time. The next variation said that the plaza should be twice as long as it is wide, and all the buildings surrounding the plaza should be 1/6 to maybe 1/3 the height as the plaza is wide. So they wanted to be able to have the sun coming into the plaza. And they also specified that the building should have covered roofs or open porches with roofs so that the old men could sit outside of the sun during the heat of the day. The other brilliance of this planning idea was that a family would buy an entire square block. And then as you can see, these get subdivided as the family grows into quarters, into eighths, to sixteenths, however you want to divide your property. And as the town expanded, you simply moved out to put out another street. The streets were to be 36 feet wide, and the blocks were, I think, somewhere like 336 feet square. So it spelled out exactly how this all should be done. And you go to a lot of any city that was founded during the time of the Spanish Empire or the Mexican flag era, generally the towns are laid out exactly like this with the central square and the surrounding buildings. Well, Santa Barbara, though, it didn't happen that way for us. You'd think that for a town that is so well known for our planning and having everything set in stone, we didn't go that way. And that's because we weren't founded as a town. We were founded as a Presidio. And the Presidio was founded for defense. So it was set back from the ocean far enough that enemy ships' guns theoretically couldn't reach the walls. It also had a clear view to the north and to the west. So in case any Indian uprisings or enemies were coming, you could see them. And on the east side, it dropped down into a large slough area or wetlands. So any attackers would have to come up, climb through all the muck, and then climb up the hillside. If you ever ridden a bike from Santa Barbara Street over to Milpas, you know how hilly that area is down there. We don't notice it today because we've done grading and we also have cars, so that kind of ruins it all, but it was a great defense setup that they had there. Well, as the city grew, or as the Presidio grew and people started moving outside of the Presidio, you would have thought they maybe would have taken the center of the Presidio here and used that as a central plaza and started building the perfect streets and blocks around it, but they didn't. Instead, their planning and I think their planning ideas were simply, where's the best soil, where's the source of water and good drainage. So that was the planning that they did to figure out where to put their adobes. Now, this is a map at the Presidio taken in made in 1820, and it shows some of the adobes outside of the Presidio. The gentleman that made this map, Edward Vischer, had a problem with perspective because the front of the Presidio, as I was saying, the front of the Presidio is Castillo Street. This is the Arianas adobe that is just above De La Guerra. Oh, this is De La Guerra Street here, sorry. And this was also up De La Guerra Street. This is above Ortega Street. And here's the ocean down here. So his perspective between the front of the Presidio and the buildings around it and the ocean were not that great. But there's a number of things that I like on here. Over to the far side at the left, we see an adobe labeled Joseph Chapman. And that's at a place called Burton's Mound that we'll visit later. The only streets mentioned on here, there's a road from the front gate of the Presidio down to the beachfront, which says the road to the Embarcadero. The next one down at the bottom says Camino de la Playa, so the road along the beach to San Buenaventura. And this road up here coming off from the front gate is also the road to Ventura. So that was pretty much it. The only roads you needed to know is where they're going. We're going to Ventura, we're going to the landing place, which is Embarcadero, or we're going to the beach. So that was as exciting as Santa Barbara was at that time. As the city grew, it started spewing way outside of the Presidio. So now we can see these dark black spots on here, or all the adobes that have come out from the Presidio. We can see the Presidio up here in the, just about in the center, right there. That's where the church is and the Presidio, and all these buildings have now grown. Those adobes have come out from the Presidio. We'll talk about this little blue feature here and this green orchard below it coming up. But basically the way Santa Barbara looked with all these adobes is unlike the wonderful planning that we have today. Back then, a visitor described Santa Barbara as it looked like somebody had gone up to the hill on the side of the city, loaded a blunderbuss full of adobes, fired it, and all the adobes just wherever they landed, that was the planning for the town of Santa Barbara. So this is pretty much how Santa Barbara looked in the 1850s as we got ready to put together a grid for the city and to put in street names. So back then, when you got a piece of property, the specification for your property line was pretty easy. Over here, we'll go down to the beach first. I'm gonna read the grant here. Granted to Antonio Maria de la Guerra, a lot 150 barras long by 100 wide at the place that was before occupied by the salting place. Well, everybody knew where the salting place was, so that wasn't going to be a problem. And a vara, the measurement that I made is 3 inches short of a yard. On this particular photo we have here, there's a piece of property here that belongs to Gaspar Orena. And his deed says, granted to Gaspar Orena, a lot 50 varas square, southeast of the orchard of Senor Thompson by the side of the road to the beach. So this is the side of the road to the beach. That's going to be actually future State Street, and that's Senor Thompson's orchard. That's all the specifications for it. And then the next one I'll read is right up here. This is a piece of property belonging to Josefa Bandini. Granted to Josefa Bandini and her spouse, Don Pedro Carrillo, 100 varas on the front and the same number adjacent to the house of Don Carlos Carrillo along the east side. So there's Mr. Carrillo's house right there. There's the Bandini house. So that was the measurement for your property. Just think how that would work in a court of law today. But all this free range adobe period is about to end because in March of 1850, the new state of California, or we weren't even a state yet, but the legislature had met. And they said that for any town to incorporate, they have to go out and have it surveyed. They have to have the bounds and the meters, everything measured, laid down on a map, and then you can be incorporated as a city. A few days later, for some reason, this is one of the great oddities of Santa Barbara, the legislature incorporated the town of Santa Barbara without having any map or anything else. They basically said the town of Santa Barbara was going to be from the creek behind the mission, running to the Cañada de las Posas, which is Las Positas, running from there along the ocean front to the salt pond, which is today's bird refuge, up to the top of the mountains, and then back down again to where this creek is by the mission. So that's Mission Creek. So That's what they did to incorporate the town. But the town still needed to be surveyed. And so it was in December of 1850 that the city of Santa Barbara put out the call for a surveyor. Now, how they did this, I have no idea. There was only a handful of newspapers in Santa Barbara, or sorry, in all of California, maybe 6 at the most. There is not one evidence that I have found of an advertisement or even polite mention that Santa Barbara is looking for a surveyor. And going through the council records, there's no payment to pay for advertisements or flyers or brochures or anything to say, we need a surveyor. So the original council minutes state that they were given 6 weeks to find a surveyor for Santa Barbara. Well, a surveyor didn't show up. It wasn't until the end of January, 9 weeks later, that they got a proposal from a man named Salisbury Haley to come up and survey the town of Santa Barbara. Mr. Salisbury Haley, that's what he actually looks like. So what we know about Haley, well, there was an article written a few years back in the South Coast Beacon, and it said Haley Street was named after a ship captain who won the bid for surveying the city. He did so inaccurately and skipped town. So Haley Street began its humble life as a street in the 1850s, abandoned by its namesake. They went on that Captain Haley would have reveled in his street's ill repute. For decades, rowdy bars lined the street. After all, he was a sailor and the kind of man whose shabby grid layout of the city led to property disputes and litigation. Walker Tompkins tells us that Haley was the skipper of the coastal steamer Seabird. He came ashore, did the survey very poorly, got back on his ship, and took off. Well, all of that is not quite true at all. Salisbury Haley was born in New Hampshire. He was, at an early age, went to sea. By the time he was 30, he was a well-known sea captain along the eastern seaboard. In fact, he was more than a sea captain. His title was Master Mariner. And as a Master Mariner, that meant that he was able to take any vessel of any size into a port without having the port captain come aboard and guide the ship in. So he was really good and up to his stuff. He moved to Key West, Florida, and operated out of there for a while, got married, had a daughter, and then his wife died, possibly in childbirth for the second child. The daughter was given up to his sister-in-law to raise because he was always at sea. He was a captain gone all the time. I know that in 1849, I next find him coming out to California for the gold rush. In 1850, he's well-known enough that he was asked to be part of the state constitution, the hearings for that. He did not get the job. There was a conflict of different elections. I think we have a problem now. They had a great one back then. And so he did not get seated to be one of the persons working on the Constitutional Convention for California. He next shows up in San Francisco in 1850. He's running a boarding house called the Haley House, which burns down, gets involved with litigation for that. And next shows up in January of 1851 in Santa Barbara to survey the city. His qualifications for a surveyor, I have no idea. All I know was that he was a sea captain. And that was my phone, good Lord. So there we go. So his job is to survey the town of Santa Barbara from the Mission Gardens. Now the Mission Gardens are up here on the corner, that little green arrow, that's the edge of the Mission Gardens. So he's to measure the city, or survey the city from the ocean to the edge of the Mission Gardens and from hill to hill on either side. And the blocks he's to create are going to be 450 feet square. The streets will be 60 feet wide, except for 2 principal streets, which will be 80 feet wide. So that's all that he knows about and what he's given to do. Now, Walker Tompkins has noted that why Haley didn't bother to do the street layout in accordance to the compass, nobody knows. That a lot of people feel that they blew it by not having these streets exactly following the compass. Instead, we can see already, though, before Haley does his survey, this is pretty much looking like State Street right here. And we'll see another slide in a minute that shows what Haley did and why he didn't do it according to the compass. Well, the main reason he didn't do it according to the compass was the city put together a committee. They didn't have staff to do it. They didn't have planning commission. They didn't hire consultants. They simply found 3 people in the community to volunteer to decide where the streets are going to be located, for the 2 principal streets to be located for the new survey. So this is what they came up with. This red line represents State Street, and the other red line up here at the top represents Castillo Street. So here's how they decided where to put State Street. The committee appointed to locate the two principal streets begged to report that they should be located. The first running a few yards east of the usual landing place at the Ply, which is the beach. So here's the usual landing place over here. This would be Chumash Street in the future. So this is how exact their measurement is. A few yards east of the usual landing place. Well, that gives you a lot of latitude. The next point from there, they said was going to be exactly 1 yard from the southeast corner of the store of Isaac Sparks. And so that's this black dot right over here. There we go. Right there is a corner of Isaac Sparks. Then across there to the 2 feet northwest of the door of the west side of Don Joaquin Carrillo's residence. So that gives us the width of State Street between Don Joaquin Carrillo's residence and Isaac Sparks' residence. And then the other line that we have here, there we go. So there's Carrillo's residence. This line is going to be Castillo Street, and they said for this other line, it's going to be at a right angle to the first, running in front of the corridor of the house occupied by said Don Joaquin Carrillo. So that was it. Haley did not put it to the compass point because the city of Santa Barbara, or the town of Santa Barbara, the town fathers said, that's it. I don't know why this is happening. That. Terrible that the speaker has to do his own phone. Alrighty, so Haley starts his survey, and what he is armed with is a surveyor's chain, a Gunter's chain. It's 66 feet long. These links are 7.92 inches long. Let's go back here. The links between them are 7.92 inches long, and each link has 2 small loops that are fastened to it. Now, the theory is, the legend is that Salisbury Haley did his survey with a broken surveyor's chain, and the missing links were replaced with leather. And on the rainy, wet mornings, the leather stretched, and in the hot afternoons, the leather shrank. And so that's why our streets are so crooked and off-center at many places. And I have been researching surveyor's chains, and I have yet to find a broken surveyor's chain. I've got so many chains from the 1850s at the time this was done, and you would think that someone would have a broken one that they would sell, but all I have found is complete 66-foot long surveyor's chains. They also mentioned that some of the links were worn, and so that's why the survey was off. Well, this is a close-up showing on the far right side and far left side, the long link and then the 2 small half-inch links that join them together. So I do not believe for a second the story of the rawhide links. So this is what Haley had to do his measurements with, 66 feet Gunter's surveying chains. And then he had 1,412 18-inch redwood stakes with a rounded top. And so every time he would measure 60 feet to a street corner, he would hammer in one of these stakes, put a number at the top, the number to designate which block it was, and then move on. So these were hammered in about 18 inches into the ground, or 12 inches into the ground, leaving 6 inches sticking up. And so Haley does his survey, going stake by stake, 66 feet at a time, measuring out his blocks, 450 by 450. Well, Haley finished his survey. He started in early February. He was pretty much finished by March, and then turned a map in early April 1851 to the town council. He was paid the money that was owed him and took off, and within a few years, he's noted as being a sea captain along the California coast. Haley was an interesting fellow. He was not only a sea captain, he was a pharmacist, he was a doctor. He later becomes an attorney and specializes in land litigation, which is kind of interesting, seeing how his survey for Santa Barbara ended up. He married into the Sepulveda family in California and was quite a notable figure in the papers of Los Angeles and the South Coast. So here's what the town looked like before Haley's survey. And a few things we can see on here. We can see in the center, Plaza de la Guerra, And to the left of Plaza de la Guerra is the De la Guerra adobe there. Those two things are still with us today. Down here is the Carrillo adobe of the Carrillo family. And so they're right across the plaza from the De la Guerras. And this is one of the neat things about De la Guerra Plaza is it's got that driveway that goes around it. And it's not only for the history of the hot rodding era in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that everybody made the loop down to De la Guerra Plaza, up to the Blue Onion at State and Valerio and back down again. But even as early as the 1850s, the important people coming to Santa Barbara, visit the De la Guerras, they'd come down the driveway, visit the Carrillos, come back up to the Terrace family up there. So this was a loop even back then. And Santa Barbara, once again, for such a small community, we had these powerful families that controlled California, and so much of what was done in Little Santa Barbara affected the complete history of the state of California. So this was important families, and we were, for such a small place, a highly important community for the future history. So this is what the city looked like before Haley did his survey, and actually it's exactly what it looked like after he did his survey, because the blocks were represented by the wooden stakes he drove into the ground, and there was really no need to put in streets or even do anything with it yet. 2 years later, in 1853, a man named Vitus Wackenreuter, who was a surveyor and a map maker, came to Santa Barbara and offered to the town that he would put together a map based on what Haley had done, showing the property owners and where their adobes were. So the city now had to figure out what to do because people's properties were in the middle of streets, their adobes were in the middle of streets. So this would show where everybody's property was, and the city could figure out what to do with it. Now, up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the actual compass points of north, south, west, and east. So just put yourself down at the ocean front, you're coming off a boat and you need to go into town. So instead of just going straight up State Street or Chapala Street into town, you've got to zigzag yourself if the streets had actually gone to the compass points. So getting to the Mission, you'd go up 4 blocks, down 5 blocks, up 6 blocks, over 4 blocks at a zigzag pattern to get up there. It was completely impractical. And plus, as we know, the town council actually told Haley where to put the first 2 streets, being State Street and Carrillo Street. So this is the map of the complete city of Santa Barbara. And you'll notice that all these streets are imaginary and all these blocks are imaginary. They're just based on the stakes that Haley put in. And you notice that the center of town is empty, and that's because there was a second map that he did, because that's where all the adobes were. So this gave them a close-up of exactly where everything was. And you can see quite a few of the adobes in the center of town are running through the future streets, people's property cutting through streets. And here is where the problem of Haley's survey that we've always heard about started. What Haley had done, which is quite interesting to me, he is actually only off some 71 feet in actually 231 from the ocean front up to the Mission. And what I believe he did, his blocks are not 450 feet square. One block might be 446 feet. The next block up will be 450, the next one 453. But what I noticed is that when he went all the way up to the Mission, we'll take a look back here. Look at the far left, which is Mission Street. Had Haley done his job exactly 60 feet for streets, 450 feet for blocks, he would have ended up with a block between Pedregosa and Mission of 43 feet wide, which would just been ridiculous. So Haley did some adjusting so that all of the blocks were perfectly square, or somewhat square, but at least there was no half or partial blocks. The only place where that happened was down along the ocean front between Santa Barbara Street and Castillo Street. And everything else is almost a somewhat perfectly square block. So I think that he did some adjusting. That's the only thing I can figure out, that he did some adjusting to make it happen. Well, what Wackenreuter did was he laid out this map based on the redwood stakes at the corners. And anybody that does surveying or does property measurement knows the problem with this map is you need to have what they call a monument. You need to have a starting place. So at the corner of State and Carrillo, or State and Canon Perdido, 2 places that had eventually had monuments put on them at the corners, you would measure from that point, go 450 feet, go 60 feet, etc. And you always would start at the monuments spice to make sure where everything is lined up perfectly. So what Mr. Wackenreuter did, though, he just simply went to each stake and then measured the properties from between the stakes and the stakes. He did not specify any monument. The problem is the city of Santa Barbara took Mr. Wackenreuter's map and accepted them as the official maps of the city of Santa Barbara. Years later, as people are starting to measure their properties, thinking they've got a block that's 450 feet by 450, they're finding out that they start at one corner, another guy starts at the other corner, and then they find out their properties are overlapping by 5 feet in the center of the block, or they're short several feet. There's something going on here. So the city in the 1870s decided to resurvey the town, put up a monument at the corner of State and Carrillo, and measure everything the way it should be. As a result, streets were now about to get moved. A man named Richard Sexton had put his fences and his beautiful row of trees in front of his property along Montecito Street. And the city said, your trees and fence are in the middle of our street, remove them. So he sued the city. He said, no, I put these up according to your survey. And the city said, well, no, we have a new survey. So it went to court. Haley came down, testified. It took months for this lawsuit to go on. It finally went to the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court said, city of Santa Barbara, you cannot redo a survey. Once you have done a survey and accepted this as the official map and the official bounds of Santa Barbara, you cannot change it to your new satisfaction. So everything went back to Haley's map and the blocks, which are not exactly 450 feet. I do note that all of his streets were exactly 80 feet for State and Carrillo Street and 60 feet for every other street. So it's amazing that if the legend was true about his chain being off, somehow he got all the streets done correctly. So a little bit about some of these things that Haley did. Now, we all know that there are three man-made objects, at least three man-made objects visible from space to the naked eye. And those would be the Great Pyramids in Egypt, easily viewable from the space stations. The cover of Maxim Magazine out in the Las Vegas desert featuring Eva Longoria, it appears. And of course, this jog in the center of our map being the offset right there of De La Vina and Mission Street. And this has been upsetting astronauts for years as they look down and go, why is this offset? Not to mention all of the people in Santa Barbara, which this offset has been blamed on Haley's survey and his horrible surveying thing. But it actually has everything to do with a sycamore tree at the foot of Hendry's Beach and a creek in front of Mission Santa Barbara. So here's Mission Santa Barbara in the 1870s. And when the Presidio Comandante, Felipe de Goycochea, and thank God we don't have a street name for Goycochea. If you think Micheltrena is impossible to spell, Goycochea is above and beyond Mr. Micheltrena. But the Presidio Comandante and the two padres for the mission got together. They knew that the mission was going to be built up in this area outside past the Presidio, but they needed to put up a boundary line between the Presidio lands and the mission lands. And so they decided that starting at an arroyo in front of the mission and following that arroyo to another spot, and then from that spot to the location of a tree at the front of the Cañon de los Pozos, which is Little Springs, Las Positas, or what we know as Hendry's Beach. So the gentleman at the far left corner is at the head of that arroyo. And if you've ever walked along, let's say, Pedregosa Street to Santa Barbara Street, there's a little creek that you can see that runs through there. It also shows up on Anacapa Street between Pedregosa and Isla. And that little creek starts in this arroyo here. So that was the dividing line between Santa Barbara and between the Presidio and the Pueblo lands. So this is the line here right along there. That is the line we're talking about. So here's the Mission Garden right here at the edge of it. And this line goes up to the mountains as the state told us our boundary line went. And then it goes down here to the Arroyo Burro Creek at the mouth of that, which is today's Hendry's Beach. So this is the line that separates the Presidio lands from the mission lands of Santa Barbara. So how does all this figure together? Well, when Salisbury Haley did his survey, he's laying out his blocks pretty square and his streets pretty square. And so he gets up here to the Mission Garden lands and lays his line straight as he should. he does not realize this red line that we see here is the actual boundary line between the Rancho Las Positas, which by then had been split off from the mission lands, and the city of Santa Barbara. So the red line is the actual line that is owned by the Rancho Las Positas. Well, back then, nobody really cared because there's no measurement stakes, there's nothing sitting out there. But as the years passed by and people started doing proper surveying and they did the lands, they went along the land line for Las Positas Rancho, they discovered that it was overlaying the streets of Santa Barbara. So they had to start shaving off the blocks. And so today, that is why from De La Vina Street all the way down over to Robbins, Mission Street loses between Pedregosa and Mission, it loses a few feet every block to make up for the property line for Las Positas, for the Rancho Las Positas. Now, I know what you're probably saying. You're going, Neal, how can Mission Street and Hendry's Beach be aligned to each other? To get to Hendry's Beach, you pass Mission Street, you go all the way into San Roque to Las Positas Road, then you take Las Positas Road all the way towards Hope Ranch, then you head towards Hope Ranch, and then make a left-hand turn, and you're there at Hendry's Beach. Well, here's our view of Santa Barbara. Here is New Mission Street, which, as you know, is cut at an angle compared to the rest of Mission Street, and that follows part of the Mission Gardens line. But here is where the creek crossed and where the thing starts, and so they follow that line, and it goes up to up here to this corner. And where actually is that? Well, there's at the upper left is Mission and Garden, and we follow Mission Street, and it goes across the hills there and ends up in a perfectly straight line at the Cañada de las Posas, where originally there was a big sycamore, and so that defined the separation between Santa Barbara Pueblo or the Presidio and the Mission lands. And so that's why that street is offset. And so you're going, okay, fine for that. What about De La Guerra and State Street? So here's the original view from Wackenruder's map of De La Guerra and State Street. And there is no jog. There's coming over here towards Chapala Street, and the street is straight and perfect the way it should be. But there's a few things in the way here. At the corner of De La Guerra and State is an adobe belonging to Francisco Leyva, and another adobe in the street here. But more importantly, there is an adobe in the street here owned by a man named Octaviano Gutierrez. Mr. Gutierrez has a street named for him, obviously Gutierrez Street. Mr. Gutierrez was also on the town council at the time of the Haley survey, and he started complaining about Haley's survey and didn't like the way it was being done. As the survey is going along, he is building his adobe, and what he knows is going to be future De La Guerra Street. So he builds his adobe there anyway. And so when they actually decide to put a street in, what they used to call it, then the official thing is we're going to open a street. And so then they would survey it and grade it. And so when it came time to do this, because Mr. Gutierrez had friends in high places, they moved the street over. So this area in here became De La Guerra Street. Also up here, there's a woman, Maria Antonia Ayala, and her adobe was in the way, and they decided that Mr. Arianas's adobe over here was of lesser importance. So the street went through his adobe, and her adobe stayed safe for a few years and then was eventually torn down. Mr. Gutierrez's adobe lasted for a while and was torn down, replaced by a hotel, and that is currently where City Hall sits. So it's kind of neat that today's City Hall sits on town council members Octaviano Gutierrez's original home site right there. But that is why the property got moved up. And again, we can see down here the Carrillo adobe, and up here the De La Guerra adobe, and the importance of De La Guerra Plaza, which has always been this delightful open-aired place for people to go to. I know that there's going to be changes coming up, and I really hope they keep the historic features of the adobe and its use in place. So the jog at Mission de la Vina and the jog at De La Guerra and State Street and Santa Barbara and Anacapa have nothing to do with Haley's surveying rope being tied together by, or chain being tied together by leather. Well, that's the end of this part. And now we have the next part. How did these streets get named? Well, several years ago, I was at a city council meeting and they were talking about the streets, and one of the persons got up and said the problem with the streets is that they're all named by gringos, and that was a complaint. Not so. The streets were named by three of the great Santa Barbarans, Judge Joaquin Carrillo at the far left. Judge Joaquin Carrillo had been a member of the town council under called the Ayuntamiento during the Mexican period. He also became a mayor of Santa Barbara on the city council for Santa Barbara, and he served as a district and a court judge, and highly regarded by the Californios as well as the new Americans coming into the city. The next person appointed of the committee to name the streets was Antonio Maria de la Guerra, the youngest son of Jose de la Guerra, commandant of the Santa Barbara Presidio for many years, builder of the de la Guerra adobe. Antonio was also on the town council during the Mexican era. He was the secretary. He also, during the American period, would become mayor. He would become a council person. He would also serve as a state senator and also a county supervisor. And during the Civil War, actually led a battalion of native-speaking Californians on the side of the Union. Also known as the brightest of De La Guerra's sons. The gentleman that we don't have a picture of is indeed an outsider. His name is Eugene Lees, or Eugene Lies, depending which way you want to pronounce it. He came from New York. He was educated in Paris. He spoke French fluently, spoke Spanish fluently, would eventually get elected to the Assembly from Santa Barbara. Not long after his arrival in Santa Barbara, he was hired to be the translator for the court system. So he translated the Spanish to English, English to Spanish as need to be. He was later hired by the state of California at the end of the year when they would bind up all the laws of California. He would translate them into Spanish and put out the books on that. So 3 very bright individuals. In February of 1851, as Haley's survey was underway, they were asked by the town council to come up with street names to be laid down upon the future map that Mr. Haley was working on. There was no record of them turning in their reports. There is no explanation of why they came up with the street names. A lot of that is open to speculation. The only thing that I've ever found is in August of 1851, Santa Barbara Street is mentioned in the city council minutes, as is State Street. They didn't call it Estado, they called it State Street. So there's no official acceptance of the street names that they put out. So, but eventually they showed up on Mr. Wackenruder's map by 1853. So what are some of the names they came up with and why? Oh, let's do a plug here. This is my book, Street Names of Santa Barbara. And when I worked for quite a few years on this book. And what I did was I threw out all the other books, not throughout literally, but just figuratively, throughout everything I'd learned about street names from other publications. And I went back to 1851 and I got maps of the city and I found different maps from different places, different landmarks and monuments on them. And so I started with a blank slate, put down the 52 street names and started doing research. And I found a few things different from what other published histories have done. And I think that this is, of course, it's my book, so I feel it's far more accurate. But because I went back to 1851 and saw through these maps and surveyors' guides what the town looked like and who these people were and why they were important to the people that named the streets. And I think what's great about Santa Barbara is so many other communities at this time just simply went A through Z, 1 through 99, names of trees or names of presidents. Instead, walking the streets of Santa Barbara, you get a full history going back through the Chumash all the way up through 1851. And streets have been added since then, which have added to our history. And so I think it's so wonderful that here we have a community where you can walk the history of Santa Barbara just by taking a stroll down our streets. So here's back to our surveyors, or the coastal survey map done in the early 1850s. And I'm going to arrow over here to the far right side. And this water feature here says Las Salinas, which means the salt pond. Today we know it as the bird refuge. And so the street that led and the upper edge of Santa Barbara to that water feature was Salinas Street, because it's a street that led to the salt pond. So many of the streets were named because of places they passed through or things they led to. And so that would have been one of them. Another one that we have here is this feature, which says Cerritos de los Voluntarios, the Hill of the Volunteers. And how did that get its name, the Hill of the Volunteers? And most people would say, Neal, there's not a hill there. I don't know of any hill that's down there by the bird refuge, or actually let me go back. This is the zoo area right here. So that's that hill called Nidiver's Hill. Now we know it as the zoo. And so this is the Cerritos de los Voluntarios. This is looking from what would today would be the Clark Estate, looking down Cabrillo Boulevard. And this is the Hill of the Volunteers that we see here. And it is a good sized hill covered with the, well, I know it as the Marmonte Hotel. It changes names so often I can't keep track of it, but I'm going to use Marmonte Hotel. And Port Lamar runs along the base of this. Dwight Murphy Field is over here to the right. Dwight Murphy Field being down in here. So this is the Hill of the Volunteers. So how did it get that name? Well, in 1818, Santa Barbara, 2 ships sailed into the harbor under the command of a man named Hippolyte de Bouchard. Mr. Bouchard has been claimed to be, he's described as being a pirate. Actually, he was a privateer. He was a mercenary. He was hired by the country of Argentina, which was at war with Spain. And so they said, attack anything Spanish. And so Mr. Bouchard came in from Hawaii. He attacked Monterey, leveled it, came down the coast, came to the Ortega Rancho at Refugio, burnt that, killed a bunch of the animals, broke into their houses. At that time, several of his men were captured by Presidio soldiers. And so he steams into, or sails into Santa Barbara, anchors offshore, and sends De La Guerra, the commandant of the Presidio, a note saying, okay, I'm going to level your town. You return my two sailors, or that's it. De La Guerra says, I can't negotiate with you. I've got to talk to the governor first, and that's going to be a couple of days. Bouchard says, no, I'm going to come ashore and take you. So either surrender the guys or we level your town. De La Guerra says, well, if you want to fight, me and my men are prepared to fight as you are. In truth, De La Guerra only had 50 men. Bouchard has 2 ships. He's got ship's cannons. He's got several hundred men. But what he sees as he's offshore, he's anchored off the West Beach about a mile offshore. What he sees through his spyglass is he's looking at this hill here. And we're looking at the back side of the hill. Bouchard is looking at the front side of the hill above East Beach. And what he sees are reinforcements coming up from Los Angeles from the south. He sees 20 at a time, another 10, another 15. What he doesn't realize is that De La Guerra has the Chumash Indians, settlers, and Presidio soldiers cresting the top of the hill, dropping down into the gully behind it, changing clothes, changing armament, going back to the back side of the hill, coming back over the top of the hill. And so Bouchard thinks Santa Barbara is being reinforced. There's just guys pouring into this place. So he negotiates a treaty with De La Guerra. De La Guerra trades him his two sailors in exchange for someone that Bouchard had captured up in Monterey. Bouchard leaves Santa Barbara. We don't get burnt, torched, cannoned, or anything. And Bouchard sails south. He then attacks San Juan Capistrano, but Santa Barbara is saved. And so that is why this was called the Hill of the Volunteers. And that's why we have Valerio Street. If you look at a map today, you see Valerio dead ends at Highway 101, but originally it was supposed to go all the way through down to the beach, passing through this hill. And so that's why we have Valerio Street and the Hill of the Volunteers. On the opposite side, along West Beach now, we're going to move over here to wherever my cursor went. There we go. To this feature here. You can see there's an embankment and a little curved out area here. After Bouchard came to Santa Barbara in the late 1820s, the Presidio, now under the Mexican flag, decided that, well, we need to put up a fortification here to guard our harbor. The West Beach is where people landed. So they built a little fort there, the embankment. They put in 2 cannon, and the name for a Spanish fort like that, a small fort, is a Castillo. And so Castillo Street got its name because it was the street that was closest to where you went to get to the fort there on the edge of what's now the City College Mesa. Except actually, all of this was torn down in 1941 when they finally extended Cabrillo Boulevard. And so all that area to our left got completely taken down. But right here at the point, this feature here was known as Castle Rock. And castle in Spanish also is Castillo. So it had sort of a double thing going on there. So Castle Rock, it was known as Point Castillo, Castle Rock, this fortification Castillo, and this street named Castillo. And so that's how Castillo got its name. Today, the breakwater, the entrance to the breakwater, the two white pillars, is just about where Castle Rock stood. Looking again to our coastal survey map of the 1850s, and right up here, well, first we can see the estero. So this is the swampland that extended all the way up over towards South Sepulveda Street and up as far as Anacapu Street, where Peabody Stadium is. So there was different springs that were up there. It also filled up as when there was rainy season, the residue, the water coming off of the Riviera area would come down and fill this area up in here. But also there was several springs right in this area where this little blue thing is here. Now this was a small lake, and in Spanish, a small lake is a laguna. So the street that passed through this little lake became Laguna Street. This green area here was the orchard and vineyard and gardens belonging to the De La Guerra family, nicely watered from this little lake. And since the street that passed through that garden, well, that's why we have Garden Street. So Laguna and Garden take their names from right along there. This is let me back up. This is an interesting anomaly. I found following this road here, which is sort of future Salina Street and possibly a future APS, but right where it crosses Sycamore Creek, I saw something on this map, so I enlarged it. And look at this, here's Sycamore Creek coming down. This is just about where 5 Points is today on Alameda Padre Serra and meets Salina Street. So I look at that, it's a roundabout. So in 1851, Santa Barbara had a roundabout. So we think that we're really clever with our roundabouts today, but the Chumash and Spanish had a roundabout long before we think that we came up with it. So speaking of the Chumash, we have at least 9 of the 52 original streets that are tied in directly or indirectly to the Chumash. This would be the first one. This is a view of Santa Barbara taken in 1793 by Captain George Vancouver, who was a British sea captain who was exploring the world, coming around, and he dropped into Santa Barbara. And so we're gonna take a look at this area right here. I'm doing a close-up of it. There's the Presidio and the mission behind it. So here's our close-up. And here in the area between Chapala Street and future Bath Streets is a Chumash village. You can see the huts there, which I have so carefully colored in. And that was the Chumash village called Siuktun. And Siuktun means where two trails run. Archaeologists later figured out that this area had been settled for many thousands of years, making Santa Barbara actually one of the longest occupied places on the planet. So for at least some 15,000 years, Santa Barbara has been continuously occupied. We can see here the Presidio, set back from the ocean and up in the hilltops, a mission which is quite different than the mission we have today. It's changed a number of times over the years. But this village here, when the Spanish arrived here in 1782, the chieftain for the village was a man named Yananali. And Yananali befriended the Spanish. He allowed some of the Chumash to work on the Presidio. And he was a chieftain, it was said, of 12 different villages in addition to Siuktun. But coming into the 1880s, this green area here is between Chapala and Bath Streets. And this is the area of the Chumash village of Siuktun. Now it's got an adobe on it and it's got vegetation on it. But here is the street called Yananali, which passes through the old village of Siuktun. So Yananali Street got its name because that was a street that led to his former village. Yananali was baptized, even though they came here in 1782, he waited until 1797 to get baptized. And at that time, his wife Anastasia was also baptized. But it turns out that old Yananali had 3 or 4 wives. So rather than being Catholic, he probably would have been better off with the earliest tenets of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. One wife died in 1798, perhaps when she found out he had 2 other wives. And then he had one wife. I guess keeping a distance between the remaining wives was a good thing because he had one wife in the Santa Ynez Valley and another wife on Santa Cruz Island. Chief Yananali passed away in 1804, but the street is still there to honor him and remind us of where his village was and who he was. Valerio. Now, Valerio was a Chumash Indian baptized around 1798. And I have a little piece on him here. Oh, 1792. Now, Valerio was unhappy with life at the mission, and so he kept running away, and he finally found a cave up in the mountains where he hid. Now, he had spirit helpers, and what they did was they gave him the power to turn invisible. And so Valerio would come into Santa Barbara and take things out of the Presidio quarters, out of people's homes, and take them up to his cave. And so the spirit helpers keeping him invisible, nobody saw him, but they would find things missing and knew that Valerio had been there. Well, in 1827, he killed an Indian he was in a fight with an Indian named Wenceslaw and killed him. And the spirit helpers were upset about that, and so they abandoned him. And so Valerio was finally tracked down by Chumash trackers and Spanish soldiers from the Presidio, and they found him at his cave. They fired arrows at him. One landed in his shoulder, another one supposedly on his ankle. He pulled the arrow out of his chest and flung it back at his attackers, as he did with the one on his ankle. But 2 bullets later and several more arrows later, they were able to kill him. And so he was buried at the mission in March 16th, 1828. And the entry that the Spanish fathers put down for his killing was they put that he was murdered. That's how they felt about it, that he should not have been attacked like that. So he gets a street, and it's kind of funny to think that he was so well known, the story of Valerio was so well known, that some 23 years after his death, a street is named in his honor. And what many people believed, that the street was named where it was because it points up to the Riviera, and somewhere up along that street line is Valerio's cave. Perhaps it's still there hidden with all the stuff that he had absconded with during his formative years in Santa Barbara. Now, many people don't think it, but you speak Chumash several times a day. Anybody that goes on Anacapa Street or Anacapu Street or Yananali, which was his Chumash name, you're speaking Chumash. Probably not exactly as the Chumash did, but at least you're making an attempt for it. So this is Anacapu Street, as laid out by Vitus Wackenruder on his map, and he spelled it A-N-A-P-A-N-N-E. On his other map, he spelled it A-N-A-B-A-N-N-I. The city council spelled it in their minutes A-M-N-E, PAMI, the third one that's on there. Finally, in 1854, the town council decided to get all these streets that had weird names that they couldn't figure out, come up with one name for it. So Anacapu became the name for this. Now, Anacapu in the Chumash language means rising place. And there's several different theories about what the rising place was. To me, I look at Anacapu Street and I see how it rises above the lower area of the slough. Once again, if you ride a bike and head up Laguna Street or head up Salsapuede Street, you will realize how high you go up to hit Anacapu Street. Plus, walk by on Anacapu Street, look down at Peabody Stadium, 25 feet down below you. And Anacapu also heads up towards Santa Barbara Street at a rising place. Behind Anacapu, we have the Riviera start to rise up. So rising place, I think, is well named for it. Also along Anacapu, we have these Italian stone pines. They were planted around 1906 or 1908. And if you look at what the roots do from these trees to the sidewalk, the curbs, and to the streets, and also the beautiful canopy of the streets rising, of the trees rising up. So you see that Anacapu continues to be, and as long as we have those trees, always will be a rising place. How about Anacapa? Well, Anacapa in the Chumash language is translated to be mirage or ever-changing. And this accurately describes Anacapa Island. If you look at Anacapa, different times of the day, you'll see one island, no island, or several small islands. And so that's why the Chumash gave it Anacapa Island. That was the name they had for Anacapa Island. Okay, matches. In 1793, when Vancouver came through, he spelled it in his log, Aniapa. So up on top is the way the Chumash would have pronounced it, and it's something like Anyapak. And I can't get the exact phrase out there. I'll work on that with some of my friends who speak Chumash. In 1827, a Frenchman came through and he spelled it Anacapa on his journal. Wackenruder spelled it Anacapap. And finally, in 1854, the city council came up with Anacapa to describe it. Now, it is said that the street got its name because it pointed to Anacapa Island. So when I'm working on my book, I get on Anacapa Street and I can't see no island, no matter how clear or good of a day it is. I finally got down to Anacapa and Los Olivos Street, and standing on a wall there, I looked down, could not see Anacapa Street, or Anacapa Island, but then I realized it's further over to the south. So Anacapa Street, if it ever pointed to Anacapa Island must be heading towards San Francisco at an awful rapid rate, because it's way up the coast from where Anacapa Street points to. But that's the name they gave it. Rancheria Street. In Spanish, Rancheria is the name given to a Chumash village or Chumash town. Rancheria Street today is mostly hidden under Highway 101. Only 2 or 3 blocks of it exist between the curve of Highway 101 and Montecito Street. So one would have thought there was a Chumash village along here, but going through all the records I can, I have not found the Chumash village along Rancheria Street. But what I did find was where that arrow is there on our map. That's the Chumash village of Cieneguitas, which is where Modoc Road and Hollister meet, in that general area. And the road leading out of town to that would have intersected once they put Rancheria Street in. If you followed Rancheria past Mission Street, you would have run into the road that took you out to the Chumash village. So I think that's why they called it Rancheria Street, because that's the road that took you out to the Chumash village of Cieneguitas. Don't know why they didn't call it Cieneguitas Street, but they called it Rancheria. Isla. Now, Isla is not a Chumash word. It is not a Spanish word. So it is a California Indian word. And I don't know exactly which Indian language it is. Some people did say it's Chumash. Others have said it is not. But the Isla is it's also known as a holly leaf cherry. It's edible. The Chumash ate the fruit from it. The seeds were also good, but they contained cyanide, so they had to be boiled to make several times to get the cyanide out, and they could eat the seeds. And I've always wondered about that. Who figured out, they would eat the seeds, they'd get sick and die, but who figured out that you could boil the seeds and get rid of the poisons? So that's something I've never been able to find out. Now, the Isla bush can grow up to a tree being 25 feet high, and there's a lot, it's indigenous to California. There's a lot of it in the foothills, and it was such an important plant, so it got a name, Isla. So originally there was a large grove of Isla trees somewhere along where this street led to or passed through, but an important part of the Chumash diet. Another street that is thanks to the Chumash that we have is called Pito Street. Pitos in Spanish means whistle. And Pito Street led over to the marshlands on the Lower East Side, where the carrizo grass grew in the creek beds and in the marshlands. And the Chumash used this, it can be a hollow stalk as big as 6 to 12 inches wide, grows some 16 feet tall, if not taller. And one of the things the Chumash did with this, besides making a carrying case for various things, they made whistles and flutes out of this. And so since this was the place where the whistles and flutes grew, the people that named the streets named this street Pito Street, leading to the place of the whistles. By the way, these drawings that I have came from my book, and they were done by a brilliant young artist named Vanessa Canejo. And so I just told her a little bit about what the street was and what it was about, and she came up with these wonderful drawings. So I'm very grateful for her for doing these. Carpinteria Street. Now, Carpinteria Street got its name because it's one of the streets out of town that led towards Carpinteria. San Buenaventura was one, Montecito was another one, all leading towards those different communities. But Carpinteria takes its name because in 1769, the first Spanish explorers coming through land were coming up the coast, and at what is now Carpinteria Creek, at the mouth of the creek, they came across the Chumash community. And they had carpenters there that were building the Chumash Tamal, one of the most brilliant craft ever devised by any Native Americans, as far as I'm jaded, so I believe that we're the best. So the Chumash built these plank canoes. No other Indian tribe had plank canoes as far as I know. This is simply one of the brilliant things of the Chumash. So the Spanish soldiers saw this, and so they named it as they're building these tomals, which is the Chumash word for it. So the Spanish named this place, the place for the carpenters, Carpinteria, and so that's how that got its name, and that's how the street got its name, honoring the Chumash carpenters. Now we come to, there's another street, Castillo Street, which is, I didn't put down on here, but Cacique means chieftain in Spanish, and they got the name from the Caribbean Indians who called their chieftains something of cacique, cacique, different spellings. Now, I don't know why the street got its name because, as far as I know, there's no Chumash chieftains along there. So perhaps it's just to honor the 12 Chumash original chieftains that were here when the Spanish came, but I can find no record of a village or a chieftain along that stretch. So that one, I'm still not sure of. But this is going to take us to Indio Muerto, the street that's getting a lot of press lately. So the reason the street takes its name was during the time of the Haley survey. They found a deceased Indian along the survey spots. And so the street that they laid out, they said, this is the place where we found the dead Indian. So therefore it was called Indio Muerto. So Indio Muerto, here's Salinas Street. It runs from Salinas Street towards the original Salsapuede Street. Just about where this elbow is on Sycamore Canyon and Sycamore Creek is where Indio Muerto is. So somewhere between Salinas Street, which would be right about here, coming down towards the Doubletree, the front of, or whatever they call it now. Again, I'm not keeping up with these names, but Fess Parker's Doubletree, about Salsapuede Street there. So somewhere along in this area, they found this deceased Indian. What I have been able to figure out was he had to have died somewhere in early February through early March, and possibly more towards later February, because I figured Haley would have been in the far edges of town. He would have done the center of town first and worked his way outside of town. And we know that it must have been a rather recently deceased gentleman because, not to get gross about it, but I did study on decomposition of corpses left out in the wild, and also talked to the coroner, Santa Barbara coroner, about it when I was first researching this. And they said 4 to 5 days it starts to get bad after that, being out in the natural air. So the fact that they were able to recognize that the deceased was an Indian tells us that there was enough features there that they could tell what he was and possibly maybe even who he was. And I went through the mission records and found all the burials. I went a month before the survey and 2 months after the survey just to make sure that I covering all the bases, and could find no Indian that was buried at the mission that fit in with the conditions mentioned of the deceased that would have said it was a guy that was found out here. So to me, when we think of Indio Muerto, so I'm pretty sure the guy was buried where they found him. And so, you know, with all the controversy we have that Indio Muerto, a dead Indian, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, which that phrase came several decades after they found this body. So simply this was the place where they found this gentleman. And so to me, Indio Muerto, the only evidence that this gentleman ever lived and breathed is Indio Muerto, which is more or less sort of like his headstone, his tombstone is Indio Muerto Street. And what I kind of thought about it, you know, as I was first thinking about all these things and trying to lay out all the facts and figures, what was going on. And to me, this is sort of like the tomb of the unknown soldier. I just feel that for every Indian that died alone, scared, cold, diseased, starved, beaten, that this street is just a memorial to them. And it's just not this one Indian that has died alone, scared, and cold up here. You know, this represents to me everybody. And every time I pass through it, I think, you know, everywhere we walk and go, someone has lost their life and died along there. And so this is, to me, is the honor for this gentleman. And some of the research I've done, I don't believe this man was a Chumash. I think he was from one of the southern tribes. Until I can get everything cemented and make sure about it, I'll announce that when I get it all figured out. But for now, this is, you know, all that I know about it. And so in conclusion, I think it's high time we landmark our street names. I tried this about 15 years ago when I was first working on street names, and the city attorney at the time said, oh, you can't landmark the street names. And I found out he was just yanking my chain. I think that in this modern era, we are so quick to want to rename everything. And I think, why can't we find a way to honor our heroes of today without trespassing on the honor and the dignity of the people that came before us and the names that were given that they found important at that time? If anybody wants to help me in that, love to hear from you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dacia. Thank you, Mason. Thank you, the members of the Historical Museum, and all of you out there for supporting Santa Barbara history.